a shadowy cabal fortifying the election for Joe Biden. Now, how was the election stolen? Now that I've spoiled, I don't know that it was stolen through fraudulent votes. I'm like 50-50 on it, like 50.1 versus 49.9. If I was pressed, I would say probably not. That would be what I would say. I would say, and I've gone through this with the left that has demanded that I give my story on what I think happened in 21. First off, let me say this. Anyone who says between these two positions, the election was stolen, 100% believe it, through fraudulent ballots, manipulation of voting machines, whatever. I don't think there's evidence for that. I think there is questions that still need resolved, but I'm not confident to say that there's proof that it was stolen in that way. I'm not. So it's not a position that you'll hear me advocating. But if I'm forced to pick between who's more reasonable, those people or the people that say 2020 was the most secure election ever, yeah, that is one of the most outlandish bullshit statements I've ever heard. An election where we massively changed how we voted, so states like Pennsylvania, for the first time ever, were allowing mass mail-in ballots, and I'm supposed to believe that that was the safest, most secure election ever? Ridiculous. Takes weeks to count the votes. It's just absolute garbage. Hyperbolic garbage. But if I'm being honest, that's where I'm at. There's about a 50-50 chance that there was some sort of fraud in that way, in how the ballots were input into the machines, manipulation of machines or whatever. But I'm willing to say I don't see proof 100% definitively. I think there is a lot of evidence that intentionally wasn't looked at. And I think the people that are saying it's the most secure election ever and then wanting you censored for discussing potential problems are tyrants. But that's not what I mean when I say the election's stolen. When I say the election was stolen, I am saying so under the assumption 100% not through manipulation of voting machines. 100% not through illegals voting. 100% not through illegal ballot harvesting. I'm saying even if none of that occurred, and I could assume none of it happened, 0%. No illegals voting, no illegal manipulation of ballot harvesting, no illegal manipulation of voting tabulations of machines. I'm not talking about that when I say the election was stolen. Now, those things may have happened, but I can't prove it. But I do know the election was stolen. How can that be? How can I say without those things that the election was stolen? Well, the Time magazine article was part of it. A shadowy cabal fortifying the election for Joe Biden. We can talk about the Time. Now, I've been community guidelines struck on YouTube for talking about that Time magazine article at least 3 times. Can't even talk about a mainstream publication admitting, yes, a bunch of people on the Democratic side were manipulating, intentionally changing laws, pressuring, lobbying, was fortifying the election, manipulating media to censor certain stories and to promote stories critical of Trump, in contact with people that were going to take it to the streets. Then, of course, we have the election integrity, the Transition Integrity Project, where people like John Podesta were on the board that what's the word I'm looking for? They war-gamed out scenarios of what could happen in the election. And in the scenario where Trump won, you know what they did? Can you guess? Can you guess what they did in the Transition Integrity Project? What the Democrats' plan was if Trump had won? Alternate electors was the beginning of that plan, something that we're told breathlessly by them is a coup and stealing the election. That was their plan, these Democratic operatives. Then they were going to push for states like California to secede from the Union unless the Electoral College was dropped. That was their plan. But that's not what I'm talking about either. Judah. Wow, how prescient. I thought I was going to be dropping spoilers, but Judah's dropping spoilers. Now I'm talking about the Zuckerman. Mark Zuckerberg. Now fully admits that he was pressured to censor the Hunter Biden story by the FBI. The same FBI that knew that laptop says in his statement that they specifically told him that there would be something about the Biden family and Burisma. Now, we're talking about an election that was decided in 3 swing states by 40,000 or so votes. Polling suggested at one point after the election that 1 out of every 3 Democrats suggested that they may have changed their vote had they known that the Hunter Biden laptop story was correct. That's more than enough votes in those key areas. And we had collaboration between the Democratic Party, the legacy media, and our intel agencies to steal the election. And that's exactly what they did. That's exactly what they did. We know about it with this story, with the Burisma story. The intel agencies that we spend millions, if not billions of dollars on, are weaponized against half of America and the political party that represents them, the politicians that represent them. Week or two after election, 2020, I'm on here streaming. And I said, everyone's, I was going through a weird time because I had this radio show at the time. And one of the things that was sort of aggravating, I could say whatever I want here. It's my show. I could say what I want. I can bring guests on. It's not as, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not as formulaic as the radio show. The radio show is going out on public airwaves. So I'm not about to drop F-bombs and stuff like that. There are certain things that I think are important to your credibility as a host of a show, particularly a show like a radio show. So if someone wants to call on tonight and talk about flat Earth, I could do it. But I don't know that I would do that in a radio show. You see, it's just not the right format for it. So we had, I'll say the name. I haven't said the name previously. I'll say, we had a Emmy, Daytime Local Emmy Award winner, 23 Emmys, I believe. Wendy Bell was coming on our radio show. That was a big get for us. Locally, Wendy Bell was sort of a big deal in the Pittsburgh area. Now, around this time, I'd been arguing behind the scenes with several people about allegations of the election being stolen. Some of them were blatantly untrue. For example, they would be like, did you see in this county in Wisconsin, 120,000 people are registered to vote, and yet they had 900,000 votes. Can you believe it? And I was like, wow, that seems, when you hear something like that, the first thing that cross your mind is, that's really easy to prove. That's like really easy to prove. If I was going to steal an election, I wouldn't do it in a way that would be so blatantly easy to prove. Like, oh, 1,000 people live in this town. You know what we'll do? We'll fake ballots for 1 million people. 1 million people voted in this town. It's like, but only 1,000 people live there. Well, that would be dumb. That would be a bad idea to do. So, of course, I looked it up. I was like, no, that's not true. This claim's not true. And so, Wendy Bell, this Wendy Bell situation. I'd talked to my co-host Carlos, and he was like, Rob, have you heard this story that right now, like as we speak, or in the past week or so, Navy SEALs have flown to Germany, and they are currently in battle with mercenaries paid by Dominion voting machines, the company that owns the voting, and Dominion's mercenaries are currently in a firefight, gunfight with Navy SEALs in order to protect their servers that will prove the election was stolen. And I was like, that is the biggest amount of bullshit I've ever heard. That's ridiculous. That's so obviously not true. That's so obviously a story that's put out there so that people will say it, then you could discredit anyone who has any questions about the election. That's how absurd that story is. Maybe the Germans won. They could have. The Mercs won. They beat our SEALs. So I was like, I don't want to talk about it in the show. Don't bring it up on the radio show. Just say something. Says, what about Georgia? That story of cases under the table, sending all the watchers on, one counting again. Was that debunked? I didn't say it was debunked. I said I haven't seen definitive proof. There's a difference. See, oftentimes what you want to do is prove something through the least path of resistance. Let me finish the Wendy Bell story and then I'll... So anyways, now we're getting Wendy Bell on the show. And we just knew we were going to talk about the election and stuff like that. What do you think one of the first things she says is? Did you hear about this Dominion servers in Germany and the Navy SEALs? And I'm just like, oh my God. Here I am on my radio show. And we get a big guest, locally at least a big guest. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know about that. Yeah, I don't know. And of course I have two co-hosts and they're like, and so I didn't get time and I should have pushed back more. I should have been like, yeah, it's garbage. That's not true. And I'll be honest, it's one of the things that I've done that disappoints me in myself. that I didn't call that out as much as I should have. Particularly because I was adamant that I didn't want my co-host talking about it, or I didn't want any part of it. They could talk about what they want. But I'm out if that's the type of conversation.